Okay, so welcome to this Facebook Live that was inspired by a post earlier today that I put up around free thinking. And what came up was a very clear indication to me that we need to address stress response and how it affects the mind and the body. If you've watched any of my videos before, you've seen this chart before. This is a public service announcement around how autonomic stress in the nervous system affects overall health and well-being and our ability to be kind and compassionate as human beings. When we are in a lower level of stress, so there are three basic branches of the autonomic nervous system. When we're in a low level of stress, we're in a state of safety or social engagement. That is, we're able to interact with one another and we're able to use the cortex of our brains effectively. That is, we're able to be in the present moment, feeling into our bodies and noticing body reactions that are going on, and we can adjust accordingly. We have flexibility. Now, when our autonomic stress load goes up, we go into the sympathetic or mobilization fight or flight response, where we get combative. We get aggressive or defensive. We start blaming. We get self-righteous. We evaluate what the right or the wrong way is to do things. We judge people for their feelings. We assume people are attacking us. We generally have a view of people with enemy images, and we can get pretty nasty. And this is a normal human response. Here's the thing, this is adaptive. And this is why I wanted to give this announcement, not to demonize anyone, but to normalize this experience of an increased stress response that we're experiencing right now, more so than usual because of unique circumstances. Shelter in place, worry about a virus, worry about our health and well-being, worrying about ourselves, worrying about the health of others, worrying about if people are doing the right thing or other people, or am I doing the right thing? These are all things that elevate the stress response. And what ends up happening is, if you were to look at what I've often mentioned from Dr. Dan Siegel, the hand model of the brain, okay, this represents the spinal column, the spinal cord, and the palm part right here represents the brain stem. This represents the limbic brain, and this represents the cortex. Now, underneath the cortex, which is, the cortex is more of the human part that allows us to think, to have empathy for others, to have effective cognition, to think ahead, to plan, to think critically. All of these things are possible because we're able to feel into the present moment and perceive life as it is. And when we get stressed, metaphorically, we might say we go offline. Our cortex is no longer in charge. It still works, but it's not seeing the present moment as it is, or as close as we possibly can be. As I'll go into in a moment, we have limited perception, just as, in general, as human beings. But this primal aspect of the brain, you might call the limbic part of the brain the mammalian part. And it's responsible for memory. It's responsible for feelings. It's responsible for integrating them, for helping us to become aware of them. It's responsible for creating meaning. And so, when somebody says something and we decide what it means right away, we don't give them a chance to explain themselves. That's what's going on. The limbic brain is taking over. And also it helps us to bond with one another. So that's one of the positive aspects of the limbic brain, is it allows us to bond with one another. And when we are in rapport, when we're bonded with one another, we can see the best in one another because we're looking for it. And when I go into perception and how much we perceive and why, we can get a more clear idea of that. But underneath a cortex that's offline when we're stressed, and a limbic brain that's doing its job to help keep us connected. By the way, this is the part that has us be tribal. So we're kind to the people who are like us, who look like us, who think like us, who act like us. And anyone who is outside of that norm, we have a primal response to not trust them. And this is adaptive just in case that's true. But obviously, that's not true of all human beings. Generally, learning to trust is a very valuable trait that we can take on, not because everyone is always trustworthy, but because when we're looking for the good in what people are saying or thinking or doing, then we can start to connect with them. And when we connect with them, we can see more of their humanity, and they can begin to see more of ours when we have that mutuality, when we have that rapport between one another. But underneath that limbic brain, we have the brainstem. And the brainstem you might call the reptilian portion of the brain, the part that is common to reptiles as well as to mammals and humans, but it's underneath the surface and it's in charge of our autonomic nervous system. All the things that are going on here, it helps us to regulate digestion, blood pressure, heart rate, your breath rate, unless you think about it and change it consciously, your immune system, your lymph system, and how your nervous system overall functions. This is all controlled overall by your brainstem. And it basically gives signals to let the body know what it's supposed to be doing. So going into what's going on with a little example of what this would be like if we go into an obvious stress response. Let's do an obvious one, right? If we're being chased by a bear, if we happen to find ourselves in the woods, we're chased by a bear, guess what? Stress levels go up. We are going to flee. Obviously, we're not going to be able to fight that thing unless we have a gun. And, that'd be tragic for the bear. And obviously a lot more tragic for us if we were mauled by a bear. So fighting or fleeing is what our bodies and nervous systems are putting into action without having to think about it. All right. Cortex goes offline. That's valuable. That's an important thing to have happen. But think about if you have a virus within your body and your body needs to fight it off with the immune system, but then a bear starts to chase you. What do you think your body's going to prioritize? That's right, getting away from the bear. All of the blood goes out of the internal organs and into the limbs. Why? To fight or flee, to get moving, to get away from the most important threat that's going on, to get away from the bear. And then once we calm down again, the adrenaline and cortisol of that flight response finally dissipates from our body. Oh, man, I can't believe just chased by a bear. Wow, I'm so glad I'm alive. We can maybe celebrate that. We might sort of shake it off, right? By the way, shaking is inherent in the process of coming back down into a safe response, but that's for another talk. So my point being that we are not able to utilize not only our internal organs effectively when we're in a heightened stress response, but guess what else happens? Our brains are not wired under a stress response to be able to think clearly. So what ends up happening is we make snap judgments. We immediately categorize people as good or bad, normal or abnormal, right or wrong. So let's take a less obvious example. We get on Facebook and we post something that's an opinion. It's something that we believe. Now, if you read something that you believe, you might go, yeah, echo chamber. You believe what I believe. All right, part of my tribe. That's not really challenging our ability to think critically, is it? Now, if somebody posts something that we don't believe in and it challenges what we think will keep us safe, challenges what we think people should do, and we want predictability. So if there are people out there doing what we don't do, oh no, that's not predictable. Our nervous system is responding this way. This is what I'm getting at. We don't consciously think that, but that's what's going on in the body. And as a result, we have uncomfortable emotions when people are different from us. So this is a normal human response. And this is what I'm intending to do here, is to demonstrate through a couple examples and show on this chart here, when we go into that mobilization response, we lose the ability to think critically because it's adaptive to do so in order to get away from the bear or to make sure that we are in a more certain and predictable space so we can have safety and we can survive. So that's an adaptive experience. But what I want to get to here is when we communicate with one another, if we don't have our stress system in check, guess what? We're not going to hear them. We're not going to hear the good traits of what somebody posts. So if you see a post on, let's say, Facebook, and you don't like what it says, your response says more about you than it does about what you're responding to. And I don't mean that as a judgment. What it says about you is that you're in a heightened stress response. let's list out some of the things that happen when you're in a heightened stress response. Okay, so we already established the blood goes out of the internal organs and out of the brain as much and into the limbs so we can fight or flee. So you might notice your breath gets shallow. Chances are, if you're stressed enough, you're only going to notice yourself from the neck up. Your body won't exist. All you're thinking about is, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right. It's dangerous to think any other way, right? This is where we go and we're not in touch with our bodily experience. So I highly recommend, if you get triggered, you put a hand on your chest, hand on your belly, and take responsibility for the stress response that's happening within you. And just take a couple breaths. Feel if your upper hand is moving where your chest is or your lower hand at your belly. As you breathe in and out, you have an opportunity to get your cortex of your brain more online, like we were talking about before. But also you can get your ability to perceive the good in people back online. And this gets to the heart of this post, this public service announcement. And it's about how stress affects our ability to be kind, to be compassionate. If we are disconnected with ourselves to the point where we're heated up and we're stressed and we're just thinking about what our point of view is, and we're not looking for a value in what someone says. For example, somebody says one thing out of, let's say, 30 things in a post or on a video that we don't like. And immediately we're like, I can't trust that person because they said something that's incorrect, which is not very critical thinking-esque, wouldn't you say? Just because one thing they say isn't quite accurate, do you think maybe the other things that they said might be of some value? And this is where you can tell whether you're in a stress response or not. So checking to see, all right, am I in touch with my body? Can I feel what's going on? Do I have pain in my body? Man, am I projecting my pain out on someone else? Did I find a whipping boy? Someone else I can take out my pain on, right? Connect to your body, feel what's going on there, because it is the root of how we behave, how we feel, and how we think. Thinking is not primary in how we function in our human experience. Fundamentally, it comes from what state are we in? Are we elevated? And if we're all the way up here and overwhelmed, and this is why people fight so hard when they're in that fight or flight response, because guess what happens if we don't defend our honor or our point of view? Well, we think that it's about winning and losing when we're in a stressed state, right? So if we don't win, then we're a chump and we lose, right? It's very binary, it's polarized. And we think this way when we're up here. But if we're a chump and we lose, guess what? We're past overwhelm. And now we're going to be blaming ourselves. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. It's okay to have your own thoughts. It's okay to think about things and try different points of view on so you can learn. But if you're in a fight or flight response, or if you're in a freeze response where you're judging others, or you're judging yourself, you're not actually online with your cortex. You are lids blown offline, metaphorically here, and you have access to only what you know from the past. That's why dogma, that is beliefs that people rigidly cling to, rather than considering ideas, is actually just a primal stress response. That just means they're offline. And that's not a bad thing about that person. That means they're stressed and they need support. And they probably don't know it, because guess what else happens up here? We get numb. We stop being able to feel into ourselves. And when we're not able to feel into ourselves, we can't feel into the experience of other people. That's actually how our brain works. If you make the hand model of the brain with me, the two middle fingernails here represent the medial prefrontal cortex, where the Hindus might call your third eye, right? That part of the brain right there has something within it called mirror neurons. And the point of mirror neurons is they essentially, you might even call them sponge neurons. Dr. Dan Siegel talks about another name for those. When we're infants, we learn how to behave from copying and soaking in through those mirror neurons emotions and behavior from our parental caregivers. That's how we learn to perceive the world. And when we do that in adult life, what we're doing is we're going through a filtration system. We're wearing, somebody once told me, When you're wearing rose-colored glasses, all red flags just look like flags. And so that's one way of demonstrating that concept. We have a filter system is the point, and we're looking through the filter, and we think we're seeing all of reality, and we're not. And when someone else is in a stress response, guess what? Our mirror neurons copy that. Even if we weren't stressed before, we start to feel stress in our bodies when another person is stressed. You see, we all really are connected more than we realize. We're not isolated individuals. We are the smallest fundamental unit of the human experience is not the individual, it's the group. We need one another to regulate one another. And that's primarily based on mirror neurons. We respond to one another. When someone smiles and we are at a relatively low stress level, we tend to smile back. When somebody is getting into a stressful fight or flee, we start to feel those feelings inside us. And if we're not in touch with our bodies, if we're numbed out, if we're living from the neck up, if we're just in our heads, we're not connected to being able to feel into another person's experience. So being disconnected from ourselves disconnects us with other people. And this is a really, really important point. And I'm going to end this video on this last point about perception. So I had mentioned in the beginning that human perception is limited. So if we want to look at the specifics of that, every second we take in through our senses, through seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling, tasting, right? We take in through our 5 senses consciously 126 bits of information. Every second we take in that information. So every second we're taking in more information. Unconsciously, we're still taking in more than that. We're taking in 2 million bits per second unconsciously. That is a vast difference. 126, 2 million. And the processing is even greater discrepancy. Consciously, we process 40 bits per second, and we process 40 million. So most of what's happening in our perception is unconscious. So what the heck are we perceiving is the question. The question is, where are we choosing to focus our conscious attention? The flashlight of attention, I call it. So where's your flashlight of attention? Well, if your stress level is up, you are going to be seeking what's wrong. You're going to be seeking what is flawed about someone else's point of view. You're going to seek how you can see them as an enemy image, even close friends and family. This can happen with anyone. This is a normal human response when we are stressed. When we're stressed, we don't think clearly. And I don't mean cognitively in terms of intellectual concepts. Anyone can learn to do that to a certain degree, depending on your individual constitution. But my point is that thinking clearly is not just about intellectual or rational concepts. It's also about recognizing when we say something that is directly in contrast to what somebody else is saying, when they're putting their heart out there and saying, this is something that I think might be a valid idea, and you jump in there and say, that's wrong, right? Anyone's going to respond to that with a little hurt and defensiveness. That's what a normal human response is. And if you don't feel that in an obvious way, then you might be numb, living from the neck up. You'd be like, that doesn't affect me. That's something called avoidant or dismissive attachment style. But we'll get into that another day. Those are not bad people. They're just disconnected from their feelings. It's a lot harder to empathize, and they actually need more space from people because it's harder to regulate their nervous systems. And there are all these different types. I'll go into that in another video. If you're interested in attachment style or the patterns of our perception that way, you can look into my other video series, the Master Your Mind and Body series. But my point is that if we want to engage in compassion, in kindness, the first step we always need to take is to self-reference. What am I experiencing in my body? The primary level of our perception. You may have seen this chart before that I've shown. The primary layer of perception is in the body. Implicit, that is unconscious. Procedural memory, that is the bodily experience of neurons firing. There's motor learning, there's the emergency response, there's the fundamental organismic response. These are all in the body, and we can tap into it through sensing our breath and our experience in our body language, which is a little bit further up in the hierarchy. Showing emotion through body language. I'm excited. I'm sad. That's the next layer of perception. And then we go up into the explicit or the conscious area. That's the tip of the iceberg, very, very little amount of what we take in with our perception. Remember 126 bits is up here consciously, 2 million per second unconsciously, right? So then we have the emotions we're aware of. I'm scared, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm happy, or excited, right? These are obvious things that we can connect to. And then on the very surface of that, we have explicit declarative, which are words. And the words we use can so easily get misinterpreted because we all have a different association with words. Our experience of words has to do with what we learned about that word. If I had a cat that I was allergic to as a child and it scratched me all the time, I'm going to hear the word cat and I'm going to have a negative body response. And I'm going to have a negative fear response. If I had a cat that I loved and was there when I needed, to have a being near me to just comfort me, I could pet that cat and the cat was receptive to me and I cared for that cat, I'm going to have a positive experience. The word cat can have a very different meaning to different people. All words are like this. Words are loaded with association. To tell someone that word means this and only this is negating their subjective human experience. It's negating what they actually experienced and created to understand that word in the first place. So when you go onto social media, guess what? You're bypassing everything below this surface of the iceberg, and you're going to jump into that arrogant stance that you know what they mean? No, you don't. We don't ever know what the other person means, but we can engage in curiosity with compassion. And we can start to feel into, okay, so what might I feel if I was to say that? What might my reason be for believing that? Could I put myself in their shoes? Could I feel into the bodily experience of, let's say they're talking about something they're scared of. Well, what's something I'm scared of? Can I connect to that? So this public service announcement is about how stress affects our nervous systems and our ability to be kind to one another, and ultimately our health and well-being. Our ability to manage stress levels by getting in touch with the body, the breath, gentle movement, and start to listen to our body cues allows us to have a reference point so we can feel into other people's experience with empathy through our mirror neurons. So thank you for joining me, everyone who's been watching on this public service announcement around how your autonomic stress levels affect your overall health and well-being. And perhaps we can find a way to self-reference, to connect to ourselves and our bodies, our breath, our sensations, our emotions, and start to feel into what it would be like to be in another person's point of view in their shoes. And from there, there's an opportunity to not only optimize our human experience and allow ourselves to feel fully, but to be a little bit more kind and compassionate to the other human beings around us, to instead of seeing enemy images when we see other people and hear what they say, we can start to see a fellow human being with needs and feelings that are just like ours. So thank you for joining me. My name is Mike Thomas. I'm the Everyday Consciousness Coach. Please take care of yourselves and one another. Cheers.